thank you all for coming to Dept Manchester this evening in what's our first talk of the year, potentially our last, but we won't go there just yet. Housekeeping: if you're wearing a mask, you want to wear a mask, be respectful of people's distances, etc. There are no fire alarms planned tonight, so if it does go off, it's probably the real deal. There is a fire exit there. There's people in Dept t-shirts will guide you to others should there need to be one. Don't use the lifts. Pizza is there, the beer is there, you've all said hello to each other. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Adam Seabridge, one of the organisers of Sitecore UK user groups. So without further ado, thank you, Adam.
First of all, thanks everyone for coming, because it's been a while since we've organised one of these. So it's nice to get people face to face and see everyone in the room again instead of doing it virtually. So yeah, thanks for coming, and I want to bring up Jim, head of engineering. Is that right, Jim?
It is.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody.
He's going to talk to you about JSS and how we did some shared JSS components for the London Marathon site.
Yeah. So I'm not very used to doing public speaking, so apologies if I'm not very good at this, but I'm going to try it anyway. So I'm going to talk to you about how we built the London Marathon events platform. Now that's a set of multiple websites, all using the same framework built on top of JSS. This is me, James Simm, or Jim usually. I'm head of engineering for Dept in the UK. I've been a developer for about 16 years, 7.5 of those working with Sitecore, and I was the solution architect for London Marathon events. And these are my social things. The bottom one is for the Sitecore community Slack, if anyone wants to talk to me on that. So I'm going to talk through who was involved, what we were doing, and how we did it. A few lessons learned, because things have changed a bit since we built it, and any questions at the end. So, who? We had a wonderful team of discovery and definition people who did UX design, content strategy, SEO, and lots of other different things before we got anywhere near build. That was some cracking work. And then we had a delivery team, which is myself, plus Mark and Dan, who were brilliant front-end developers, Sarah, who did all the testing, and Emma, who did project management. So, what were we doing? So the brief from Melanie was to completely transform the digital estate. They had a load of disparate websites built on top of Django. They were all over the place. There was no content strategy, completely different designs, made no sense really. And also, when they found out that we were going to take over running some of the digital estate, they actually pulled the plug. So we had to rapidly build this stuff fairly quickly. We were appointed to build a design system, produce style guides, and build a library of shared components, and a framework to roll it out across all of those digital estate. So just to showcase a little bit of the design work we did, there's full digital style guides for London Marathon, for the Big Half, for London 10K, for Swim Serpentine, all the events that London Marathon events run. We've got every little detail imaginable about every little bit for every brand. London Marathon chose to build on Sitecore XP. At the time when we started it, it was Sitecore 9.3 was the latest version. They went with managed cloud for the deployment, and we chose to put them onto JSS and React. And that was mainly to make use of our pretty good React skills in-house, and to avoid having to constantly transpose stuff from front end into React, to Razor templates, where we get integration with nodes, and it's not a pleasant place to work for most front end devs. A little note about Sitecore's headless stack. I guess there are people here who may well know about this, but I'm going to go through it anyway. It kind of consists of two parts, really. On the back end, you've got a layout service that converts any content in Sitecore to JSON, and that's done like conventionally. So if you get a single line text field, it converts that in a particular way to JSON, and so it's really flexible. You can build up any template you want, and it'll give you an expected output. There's also a GraphQL endpoint that allows you to do query and search capabilities. And then on the front end, there's a set of core NPM packages that allow you to interact with Sitecore and abstract away the logic for having to do that with Sitecore's APIs, plus a bunch of framework-specific packages that allow you to use React, Next.js, Angular, and Vue. Alternatively, there's also an ASP.NET rendering SDK that allows you to do .NET Core rendering if you want to, if you don't want to work in JavaScript land. So yeah, the SDK provides React, Angular, Vue, and Next.js these days. At the time when we built it in the first place, Next.js wasn't supported, but it is now. So there are multiple ways of working with JSS. So the code first way, these are the two ways that are listed in the documentation from Sitecore, is kind of led by the front-end team. So they would define the renderings that you have on your website, the templates and the data structures that you're going to have, and that gets imported into Sitecore via an API endpoint. We found that that doesn't really make use of our Sitecore experts' skills in templating and things like Helix modular design, but it does allow the front-end developers to work completely disconnected from Sitecore, which is a real bonus for guys that run Macs. They don't need to have a running Sitecore instance to work with. And the alternative way is Sitecore first, so Sitecore devs go and build all the templates, all the renderings, and they define all the data and structure that's there. And the front-end guys just connect to a running Sitecore instance. We kind of found another way via various blog posts and discussions, which was to kind of agree the structure of data that the front-end guys wanted for each component, and the back-end guys would help them structure that in a way where it's something we knew we could produce out of Sitecore. We create the mock data in the JSS app in YAML that allows those guys to work completely disconnected, and then the front-end guys go away and build exactly the same thing in Sitecore, and then when we deploy, those things come together and you have a working site. There are a couple of ways of deploying JSS. So you've got integrated Node, which kind of wraps Node into the MVC rendering pipeline. It actually requires no extra infrastructure. You just have Node installed on your content delivery servers. It's pretty flexible, but it's not as flexible as it could be. But it's very simple to get going in that group. So if you're working locally, that's a brilliant way to get going. There's no need to run extra node services and things like that. Great. With a fully flexible setup, it's completely headless. Sitecore provides a JSS headless proxy project that you can use and adapt to your needs. That does the server-side rendering in Node, and your Sitecore content delivery instances effectively become APIs and nothing else. That's a nice way of working, but you do still need to deploy your JSS like front-end assets to the content delivery server, content management server, which allows for experience editors to work. A slightly different way of doing it, they have a thing called rendering host that allows you to completely separate your front-end and back-end code bases, deploy your front-end to an entirely unrelated app running in Node and cheap Linux server or something, and have the content management instance call out to that to do experience editor support, which is great because that means you can deploy your front end and back end and work on those two things completely independently of each other. As long as your data structures kind of don't have breaking changes in them, that's great. You can just crack on. There's no need for each of them to depend on each other. So I'm going to go for a few differences from the traditional Sitecore way of building things in MVC and how it works in JSS. So for controller renderings, the traditional Sitecore approach is to use a normal MVC controller to implement your extra logic and retrieval of additional data that's outside of your data source, mapping and reshaping that data and passing it through to the front end, which is usually Razor. JSS approach to doing that. So the front end in JSS completely talks to Sitecore via the layout service API. It doesn't really know anything about MVC or any of that pipeline at all. But you can customize the layout service output in a number of ways. If you want to alter globally the way a field type is serialized, so for instance, if you want rich text to always be output in a certain way, or you've got a custom field type like a link list or a picture field or something like that, you can implement a field serializer to do that. And that just gets injected by the normal Sitecore config route. For an individual rendering, you can implement a rendering contents resolver. That allows you to pull in extra bits of data or completely alter the JSON output for a given rendering. And you can also alter context data, which is the stuff that's kind of always returned with a request. I'm not really showing it in here, but the response from the layout context layout service has a context bit and a root bit. The root bit is the data that's specific to the page you're on. The context bit is the sort of site settings, what language you're in, what URL you're on, things like that. So you can alter that data as well separately. For view renderings, usually you just have a razor file, do your thing in there. For JSS, there's no razor. The front end is entirely responsible for rendering HTML, and it allows for much better separation of concerns. You don't have any presentation stuff in the back end, it's all in the front end. So, API controls. We often use API controls in our kind of older projects to do more interactive stuff like search, form submissions, AJAX requests, things like that. For JSS approach, you get the GraphQL API is the best place to do that. You can use that to retrieve different Sitecore queries, you can do search with it, you can do mutations to allow form submissions to go back through that route. It gives you a bunch of those things out of the box. So you get access to the Sitecore item tree and querying functionality and basic search implementation. It's built on GraphQL.net and it's really easy to extend, so you can just inject your own config to add more stuff. We really completely overhauled the search implementation for London Marathon. So just mutations. But if you really need to add extra API controllers, you can just add them. It's still just an ASP.NET app at the end of the day on the content delivery server. You can put those things in there. How did we do it? So for the back-end solution, we've gone with Helix architecture. Everything's broken down into the usual layers you get with Helix. You've got the foundation layer, which has got your cross-cutting concerns, things like multi-site framework, the caching implementation, search stuff, and then we have our feature layer, which has things like the ad blocks and features and heroes, the kind of things you'd expect to find on the website. And then for each individual tenant website, we have a project. Most of these things, depending on what's involved in them, some of them are really simple, like there's no code in it whatsoever really other than configuring Unicorn to serialize the right bits. And others have got the rendering contents resolvers, GraphQL implementations. It really varies, but most of them are fairly small. But they do provide future extensibility points if you do want to start adding more functionality to these. So for the multi-site structure, we knew we needed a set of components that would be global across all of these brands with UI differences. So we built the same structure. We've got this basically encoded as a branch template, so we can knock out additional sites as we see fit. They'll have exactly the same structure. The settings area contains kind of SEO metadata stuff, navigation, redirects, robots, search, etc., etc. Each site has its own dictionary domain, which allows us to provide all the labels and bits and bobs like that, and the site route, which gives us all the pages. So the challenge with JSS when we started going down this route was all the documentation is kind of focused on having a single JSS app and how to use that. So they can do multi-site with SXA and JSS, but they kind of expect you to have, well, it seems from the documentation they expect you to have a single JSS app and then different sites that use it, pass some different data in to make it work. We needed to have the same set of components, but we didn't want to have the same app for each one. We wanted to be able to deploy these things separately. But we needed to have different styling, fonts, patterns, etc. applied to it. We didn't want to duplicate code in each one of these JSS apps. So the way we've kind of hung this together, this is what Learner mentioned for Boxever. is we have a bunch of NPM packages. Most of these are JSS apps, so the London 10K, London Marathon, Swift Serpentine, Big Half, Westminster Mile are all JSS apps built with the usual JSS Node client. They all import the packages from the LMEL components package. So those components are all white labeled and have theming support. And the JSS apps for each event website just import those things and apply a theme to them. It makes it a lot simpler to work with. We don't have to go into each one of these folders and do npm install and all other plugins to get it to deploy. We just call the main package JSON and say deploy, and it'll build all of them and deploy them into the right place for us. So the overall view is backend is your typical Helix structure for Sitecore. All interaction is done through layout service API, GraphQL API, and there's also a dictionary API. It's kind of bolted into the layout service. We didn't go through that. That just exposes the dictionary domain for each site out to the front end. And then for the front end, we have multiple JSS React apps that all use the shared components from the MEL components library. So we do have a few lessons learned. It's pretty successful. JSS is brilliant. I don't think I would want to start a Sitecore project greenfield these days and not use JSS. I can't imagine I would ever want to go back to working in Razor. It allows us to work completely on the things we want to work on. Myself, from a back-end point of view, I can concentrate on getting the right data out of it. I can concentrate on getting the right performance out of it. It's great, really enjoy it. And the front-end guys can just work in React and not have to worry about Sitecore at all, except when we get into experience on it. While the disconnected mode thing is great, once you start doing complex things and start using the GraphQL endpoint, you can't work disconnected anymore. There are potentially ways of doing that. Adam Lamar's got a blog post from a while ago about implementing his own disconnected mode for GraphQL with JSS, but it's pretty specific to what he was trying to do. It doesn't really work with what we were trying to do, but it might be possible one day, and that would be lovely to have it. Front-end guys just not need to worry about Sitecore at all. It would be brilliant, but maybe one day. Integrated deployment topology is really, really simple to get going on, but there is major performance pitfalls that you might not be aware of. I think if you read the documentation, it does actually say don't do this. But it didn't when we built this thing. We found these problems as we went along. So, the way Node is integrated with the MVC view engine is interesting. The layouts, the stuff that gets cached in a normal Sitecore implementation, when you set the caching on a rendering, is the HTML that's output from it that gets cached. So that means you can vary that, and all it does is bolt it all together again and output that. In JSS, with the layout service, what gets cached is the JSON that's been serialized from your data source and other things, if you're using rendering content resources. So that means Node's running on every request, whether you want it to or not. Now, the big problem that comes with the way this is integrated is that Node is single-threaded, and .NET isn't. So once you start throwing lots of traffic at it, it becomes a major bottleneck. So the way we've kind of alleviated this problem temporarily is we've made caching kind of all or nothing situation. So all of the HTML for a page is cached. We've implemented our own, the vary by rules are implemented, but they're on a page basis rather than on a component basis. And that can be pulled out at a later date when they need to start using things like personalization and things like that. And we will, if you go back to my slide around the way things are deployed, if you move to the more headless route of doing this problem goes away effectively. You can still do all your usual rendering because all it's really doing is overloading.
Good evening, everyone. So I wanted to talk to you today about Sitecore's acquisitions. Some of them from a while back and some more recent. and then set the scene for kind of a debate session to try and get people's opinion on what they think. I know there's a few people in the room with strong opinions, so I'm sure it won't be too difficult. So I'm going to kind of introduce what the acquisitions are for those that don't know as well. I've got only a couple of slides, you'll be pleased to know. There's a few acronyms which I'm going to try and explain as well, so if you don't know what they mean, just give me a shout. So I'm a freelance Sitecore developer, been working with Sitecore for about 8 years. Also organise the Manchester SUGUK along with Dom when we can. I think this one's been particularly tricky. And I've been in MVP for the last 4 years. So acquisitions. So Sitecore bought a company called Star Labs. I think it was in 2018, 2019. And that has now been rebranded Content Hub. And that's kind of a DAM digital asset management, product information management, and content marketing platform. There's already 3 acronyms there. And that has a bunch of personalization in it and so on. So they integrate that. I think that's all integrated with the core product now. And then over the last year, they've really gone to town with acquisitions, and they've I think they bought Boxever and 451, and then Moosend. So Moosend is an email marketing platform with analytics and so on. Boxever is quite an advanced, what they call CDP platform, customer data platform. So it's got AI, machine learning. It's got like a really impressive drag and drop interface for building models, and like a really advanced version of, I guess, some of the stuff XP does now. And then 451, which is now called Cloud, is like a headless commerce solution. And then more recently, I think a couple of weeks ago, they bought this Reflection platform, which is a AI search platform, which is all being tested in search recommendations and so on. So this might be a bit confusing for anyone that works with Sitecore. Like, Sitecore already has some of this. They already have a media library, they already have EXM, they already have XP, they have Sitecore Commerce. They actually didn't have a search platform, but they work with various partners and also support Azure and so on and stuff. But this is Sitecore's answer to the drive in the market to move towards SaaS, basically. So this is all part of what they're calling their SaaS journey, and moving towards away from what's called a traditional DXP platform, or kind of monolithic DXP platform, to what is termed a composable DXP. So yeah, what is one of these? So the idea is that instead of having one platform with a load of stuff integrated into it that all works together, instead you can select your kind of best of breed products, and then you can integrate those. And the idea is that's a lot more kind of flexible. It gives you more agility and freedom on what you choose. You can include just the tools you want, because everyone knows that actually with Sitecore a lot of people don't use a lot of functionality. So you can just spend the money on elements that you are going to use as a business. And then you can choose your own kind of hosting architecture. It brings SaaS on board, and also it's a lot more kind of flexible. You're not tied into a particular vendor. So there's a lot of kind of benefits that you can see. This is a Gartner diagram where they've got the monolithic XP. So that's kind of today Sitecore XP, and then you've got the composable DXP on the right hand side. So you get the trade-offs here are basically with a traditional DXP, you already have your integrations, but it's not very agile, it's not very flexible. Your hosting is complicated. Hosting Sitecore these days is, as Jeremy will tell you, I'm sure, pretty complicated. So it's got more and more difficult, and it's probably not the way that modern businesses want to work. They want to be able to split the market, stack up into different elements and pick the best of breed products. So that's kind of where Sitecore moves to with this. So a key bit of this is the CDP. So that's Boxever, Sitecore CDP as we've branded it. and that collects all of the data from various customers, helps do recommendations, as it says there, right person at the right time. So this is a diagram I borrowed from Jason from Sitecore. He presented this at a subgroup back in June, and this is kind of a real world example of what a composable DXP might look like. On the left hand side you've got your CMS, might be Sitecore, and then you've got maybe some commerce, you've got some internal APIs, some other internal systems, external third-party APIs you're integrating, and then in the middle you've got what's called a content mesh, so that's your front-end interfaces, it might be .NET Core, React or Next.js, etc. And then integrated into that would be your various DXP providers, SaaS products, so you've got your CDP, analytics, automation, etc., etc. So you can see, these aren't necessarily Sitecore products. There's Salesforce down there. You might have a completely different email providers and Moosend, and then you're then free to host this how you want on whatever hosting. So it might be, traditional AWS or Azure cloud platforms, or it might be something like Netlify for kind of static site hosting. So hopefully this kind of illustrates how it might actually work in the real world. So, given all this, hopefully you understand a bit more about where someone's going and what they've done with acquisitions so far. How do you all feel about Slack's move to acquiring these platforms instead of integrating them into the product as we normally would?
Now I've got a question.
Go on.
What does this do for licensing? Because as we all know, Sitecore have got themselves a bit of a racket going on.
I don't think it's going to get cheaper.
That's unfortunate.
Is the politically correct
because
answer.
Basically, like the Sitecore product is just now like, what's it doing different than anyone else? Plugging on these things on the side.
I think they've recognised that, and that's it. I think they realise that they've fallen behind a little bit with innovation and the tech stack and so on, and this is kind of their answer to it. But yeah, from a licensing perspective, I think that's definitely a challenge.
I'm interested to see how. One of the selling points of the kind of monolithic DXP thing at the moment is that it's all in one interface.
Yeah.
I've had a look over Boxever and I've had a look over Overload. They're all completely separated and not integrated in any way whatsoever.
Yeah.
I'm interested to see what. It's all well and good to kind of talk about it at points now, but is that the end picture, do you think? Or are they going to bring it together with a single UI? Or
yeah, my understanding is that they will integrate them all with APIs. So every single one of those SaaS vendors ticks all of the MASH boxes, API first, etc., etc. So yeah, the idea is to integrate them all.
They've got to do something. They've got to do something here to get past the market perception that we've had years of senior people from Sitecore standing on stages and holding that crazy diagram of 10,000 different marketing products.
Yeah.
That no one, they put it on the slides and you can't read it because you manage just about 10 pixels square.
Yeah.
So many of them, and they've been saying for years that that's a horrible thing. What you want is this monolithic thing that just gives you all this good stuff.
Yeah.
In order to kind of overturn that and say, actually, now we're all about modularity, they've got to come up with some sort of clever play in its modularity. Hey, we've got the best stuff.
Yeah.
Look how well it integrates and how magically you can drag and drop from one to the other. But
yeah.
It's going to take them a few years to get there, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, because like you say, they've held up, Adobe as being sort of the poster child for buying loads of stuff and badly integrating it, and it being a bit of a mess. And is this any different? So I think the way they're positioning it is that the market has moved on. That businesses have developed more now, and each department needs their own specialist platform that is best of breed rather than perhaps the offerings that were out of the box. But yeah, it's a tough sell, I think, and as we were saying, like the UX is different across the different platforms, but I don't think that'll change, to be honest. I think that the way they see it is that if you work in a particular part of the marketing department, then you'll use Boxever, and that's the interface you want, and that's had, I think they started back in 2011 or certainly 2014 with the CDP, so that's like 10 years of investment in that platform. They know what they're doing, and so that's the platform for that, and then you've got...
Is that one better than the alternatives? Like, is Boxever better than just Salesforce for managing your customers? Is there people who are experienced in that?
I think in terms of building like models that make recommendations based on complex business logic and understanding the customer and all that, then yes, I think so.
You've been sold by a drag and drop interface.
That's what's happened.
Is it better, or is it just that they couldn't buy Salesforce, so they had to buy something that they thought was good but was available?
It's a very good question. Yeah,
I think it's quite good in the market, but there's plenty of competition out there.
Yeah.
The issue is it's very suited to enterprise, because the price point for Boxever's entry level $350 a year, which for traditional cycle
350 quid.
Yeah, it's really, you wish.
You can get two.
And that's entry level, so typically they see deals around about $500,000 for Boxever. And the issue is it's great for enterprise, but for a lot of, I suppose, legacy cycle customers, that's more expensive than the license itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, February they say, but nobody's. Yeah, but I think what they'll do a typical light version. So they'll get you in, but then if you've hit a certain amount of limits, you're going to go back up to the normal cost.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think licensing wise, they're now looking at themselves as a suite of products, as opposed to.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of where the composable DXP bit comes in. So I think the concept is for new customers, this is probably an easier transition in that they'll purchase perhaps Sitecore web content management system like traditional CMS, and then they'll cherry pick the bits of the other SaaS offerings from Sitecore and maybe other vendors, and then bring that together, and there'll be integrations provided by Sitecore at Box, so they'll deliver those and they will work together via APIs. I think that's the vision, but it's definitely a difficult journey for existing Sitecore customers to get there. That's a challenge, I think. Alright, got another question. So how do people think they might actually integrate them? And what does it mean for the existing offerings? So things like EXM, Commerce, XP, will those go away?
I think Commerce would go in XP, to be perfectly honest.
There are, I think, a lot of people out there who say they should just cross Commerce and EXM within it. And what they're saying is that they won't. I don't know how long that's going to stay, but the point that their position at the moment is we have to continue to support people who don't want to go to SaaS platforms.
Yeah. People
who work in healthcare-related things where the location of your data is critically important to you.
Yeah.
So certainly their public statements at the moment are all that stuff stays, and there is an ongoing roadmap for continuing to develop. The question on the surface is, how long is that roadmap? How long will it take them to get to? Yeah, who cares? Everyone goes back.
Yeah, I think not everyone can afford. I don't know how much Moosend is, but I'm sure the cloud is pretty expensive. So, but then again, Cycle Commerce isn't cheap either. So, are there customers that actually they just need, well, Sitecore XP is good enough for them, they don't need to pay for Cycle CD3 or
there's a kind of side licensing discussion starting to happen, I think, about the idea of currently an XP that actually have like downgrade it to XM and just use other stuff to do all the XP features.
Yeah, well, I think the other thing is Sitecore have always been criticised for their lack of transparency with licensing costs, and depending on which client you are and what calendar month it is and so forth, you'll get charged a different amount. And I think with the SaaS offering, that they're able to then make that more transparent.
Well, I mean, so the interesting thing there is, do they go to log into our portal and type in the credit card number and buy the thing you want? No salesperson is involved. Or do they try to
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see how that pans out.
I'm pretty sure Sitecore salesmen are going to want to come straight into your office and they've got to give you the hard sell.
Microsoft are doing a similar thing with Azure resources. Small businesses and most ordinary humans just log onto the portal and give their credit card details and fire up a PM. But if you're a big enough organisation, you can go and negotiate with Microsoft about bulk purchases and do discounts and stuff that small businesses can't get to.
I think they've got 60 open hires across EMEA for sales roles. So I think they're going down the enterprise route in quite a big way. They're just getting more salespeople to go after more targets because growth is just Steve's biggest factor. So I just don't think they'll go.
I assume that's what his bonus is.
Yes, I reckon. So.
Are they going to make the license cheaper in any way for just a normal content management system? Or?
I think if you go SaaS on SaaS, like Sitecore WCMS on SaaS, then yes, but you will literally get that and nothing else unless you purchase the other elements. But yeah, I think that will be a more reasonable offering.
So how much are they, like these acquisitions? I've not really looked at them too much, but are they decent in comparison to stuff? Or are they dog shit? Is it something we would want to work with?
Yeah, I mean it's not dissimilar to like Commerce Tools or Shopify Plus or something like that. I don't know what the real differentiating factor is other than Sitecore already.
Cheaper to buy.
But it looks like a reasonably good platform, but I think it's more like B2B focused rather than B2C at the moment. But they're planning to do both because optimizers does both, and they don't.
I assume they're not going to limit integrations to other stuff as well.
No, so the whole idea with DXP is you can choose
other than trying to sell you
breed product. So yeah, it could be an entirely different vendor that provides it.
So yeah, once you go down that kind of headless JavaScript integration to your external personalization system, there's nothing they can do to stop you to get your brand project. But they're not going to provide a toolbox of integrations for competing products.
No, yeah.
The things that like I feel like that are overtaking Sitecore are the things that just do one thing well.
Yeah, I agree.
The content do it well. Don't give a shit about your personalisation because Google does it better than what they would do.
Offering it is one thing, but offering the option to do the opposite as well is also quite an attraction because if you've got people who are actually wanting to Sitecore's content management, they don't want any of this other stuff.
Yeah.
But they feel like they're locked into it, whereas actually they want to manage everything from external resource. But if Sitecore were to offer the APIs that would be needed to hook them things in, that's quite attractive. So if they were to hook these new products in that way, but do it in a way that can also hook outwards, then maybe it's attracting customers from different routes in that mindset.
Well, maybe long-term strategy will be to be able to have providers to plug in other third-party vendors. But
I think it'll always be a sell. I'm
Yeah.
thinking you need someone to get in on the bike before you start.
Yeah, I haven't heard of any plans right now. But
one thing that we're interested in is, I think at the moment, I'm led to believe that to get the JSS module that I was talking about in your license, you have to buy XP.
you have to have a cloud license as well.
Yeah, consumption license.
Yeah, subscription.
But,
so
as far as I understand with the plans, XM is the only bit that CMS that remains in the long run, for cloud anyway.
Yeah.
I guess the JSS stuff gets replaced with Experience Edge or something.
My understanding is they're going to pull JSS out into just like, well, they already have headless services, and then that will become part of the core product offering, I think, because I think they've realised that that's shackled them by trying to sell it as an additional license. I think that's coming. I don't think it's been agreed 100% yet, but that's the direction they're heading in.
In trouble.
Oh, I've only got one more question. So last question is, does this basically cause confusion or choice paralysis because there's too much flexibility? You've got the traditional XP platform, you've got, on the other end, you've got this composable DXP where you're cherry picking all these different best-of-breed platforms, and then somewhere in the middle, if you're an existing client, you might want to start integrating some of these SaaS products, and I think that's what they're going to offer, being able to integrate some of those before jumping fully into PHP.
There'll definitely be confusion, not just me as well.
I think they've got a real problem soon for upgrades, because you need to go to 10.1 before you go across. And I think for anyone underneath there, the upgrade cost and the change in technology and training, people are going to, at that stage, start looking at the market.
Yeah.
So I think for new customers, we agree that that's fine, but I think our existing Sitecore database, if you're getting hit with a hefty change in license, big upgrade cost, and you have to learn new technology, guarantee they're going to look around.
Yeah.
So they have to be very careful, and they're showing no signs of doing incentives to move across.
Yeah, because the cost of jumping to another platform may actually end up being cheaper if they're not careful.
Yeah, because essentially you're rebuilding it.
Yeah, and I think okay, so this is our third speaker from Sitecore, and it's finally agreed to speak to us today on an integration he's done with Content Hub and Teams, the Content Hub Experience Edge. Cool. So I'll let Daniel take over.
Cool. Thank you. I'll start by sharing my screen. Please let me know if you can see some presentation slides. Cool. So hello everyone, apologies for not being there in person with you. Unfortunately, I'm not double vaccinated, so I thought you'll be better if I do this remotely. I hope everybody can hear me okay and see my screen and all good. So my name is Daniel Ionita. I'm a sales engineer here at Sitecore UK. And since joining about a year ago, I've been mainly focusing on the Content Hub product. So I'm really excited to talk to you about today about Experience Edge for Content Hub, and also show you what you can do with it. So just go to the next slide. Okay, so what is Sitecore Experience Edge? At its core, it's a set of services for headless content delivery at scale. I know it's a bit of a mouthful, but this will give brands the ability to publish content to any device or channel, whether that's watches or phones, tablets, voice control devices, or any other channel that you can think of. It also provides marketers with options to deploy their content through a high-performant and scalable content API. And this industry standard API will empower developers to create experiences for any device, as I said, in any channel, using the developer language they prefer. So you're no longer stuck with .NET. Using Experience Edge, this comes with the graphical endpoint, which I'm going to show you later. And you can basically use any programming language. There's so many languages supported out there now. So on this slide, you can see a few market problems that Experience Edge solves. So as you can see, and you probably know that organizations need to quickly implement solutions and experiences across multiple channels. And mostly they race with their competitors, so they launch the products faster. So a faster time to market makes big impact on any business. Infrastructure-wise, you also may know that it's pretty difficult to scale up and down based on demand. So it is required to run this modern digital marketing at scale. It's very complex, and it's leading to high support and ongoing costs. So having a platform that reduces that complexity, it's also very useful. I'm not going to go through all of the slides, all of the points here on this slide, but you can see Experience Edge addresses a lot of market problems. So if we look at it in more detail, Sitecore Experience Edge, it's a SaaS delivery layer on top of both Content Hub and Experience Manager. And it provides, as I said, a content API based on GraphQL that can be consumed by any type of application. And with that GraphQL endpoint, you can get content and assets that are stored in Sitecore in a geographically distributed environment that is designed to handle that high performant request, or the high traffic and high request load. And it also allows a true Jamstack and headless architecture based on Sitecore item data or content that is stored in Content Hub. And this is another way we could look at it. So the Sitecore Experience Edge brings content as a service to both content Hub and Sitecore XM. Today we'll only be focusing on the Content Hub endpoint, but I'm happy to go through another session maybe in the next user group to the XM proposition as well. So with this, customers can use their existing investments in Content Hub or XM and publish that content to the edge. And then the GraphQL endpoint can be used by any other technology to repurpose that content. So let's say you created it once for your campaigns, but then you want to publish it to a mobile app as well. You can do through this GraphQL endpoint. And the endpoint itself runs in multiple delivery regions and uses CDNs to store the API results as close as possible. So all of the results, let's say you call it once, will be cached and stored in CDN. So you get really fast responses. And as you also may know, you're probably asking now, well, why this and not the REST API? And the reason is because GraphQL, it's much more efficient. So rather than, let's say, if you want in Content Hub now with the REST API, if you want to get the public link, you would probably have to make about 4 API calls. So to go through all of the relationships and so on. But with GraphQL, you can get all of the assets, and then you say, okay, from assets, I want just the ID and the file name and the relative path for that asset to public link relationship. I'm going to show you that shortly. So what can we do with this? Why Experience Edge? There's lots of ways you could use it for, from making a single page application, as I said, a single page application in Vue to a mobile app in React Native, or sending notification messages that are stored in Content Hub to a smartwatch. Honestly, there's lots of ways you can use this, and lots of use cases for this. But the way I use this for this demo is to deliver assets that are stored in Content Hub to Microsoft Teams. So users can quickly share an asset or two, or any number of assets with their colleagues in Teams without having to, again, switch platforms, go download it and upload it to Teams just to share that asset. So if I just switch to my code in here, before we get into the code, I just want to clarify. Probably you know this by now. As I said last time in my last talk, I'm not a very heavy programmer, but I can do stuff and put stuff together. So this is exactly what this is. This is cowboy coding, as my colleague Jay-Z likes to call it. But basically, you'll see that we can do a lot with just a few lines of code. So the code that you see here, I took an example from Microsoft Teams website, and in the basic example that I took, they were just sending some cards with some messages on top, and the extension that I did, or the integration, if you want to call it that, basically adds an extra layer to that card, which is the image and the asset title and so on. So if I just run this, before talking about the code, let's see exactly how it looks like. Now, it obviously has to go through and build everything, but as soon as it's done, you'll see that it will ask us to add this new app to Microsoft Teams. If you do this in a production environment, you do it for a proper organization, I think the way you would have to do it is to build it once, and then you add that app to Teams, and then later on everybody can use it. So you'd make, let's say, only one key. But at the moment, it's all local. So if I click add, this will basically add this CH Messages app to my available apps. And then if I click on these 3 dots, you'll see that I have a few apps in here, and this is the latest one that I've created. And then this will allow me to search for assets. So I can say, let's say I'm looking for a lemon asset I want to share with my colleague Jay-Z. As soon as I type lemon, this will go call the GraphQL endpoint with my query, and then show me all of the assets that are available in the platform. Now it's obviously demo time, so it loads much slower than usual. But as soon as it loads, you'll see that we get some assets, and we also have this strange crossed-eye icon. And the reason we see that is because those assets don't have a public link. So as you may know, you need to create a public link. This could also be automated. But for this demo, I just wanted to show you that it's possible to kind of have some of that logic as well to test whether or not there's a public link. Probably if you, again, if you do it in a production environment, when you select one of these assets, you would want to create that public link. But for now, what I did is just to say, okay, I want to create a card with that asset. And then inside the card, it says the asset selected exists, but it has no public link. So create a public link in Content Hub if you want to share it. So then users can go in here, click on this View in Content Hub button. This will take them to exactly that asset. and then create a public link and share it. Otherwise, if the asset already has a public link, we can share it straight away. So if I just go back to my chat and go and search for another one, let's say, I'm going to search again for lemon. And let's say we want to get this asset. So this will automatically add it to this message, and then we can share it with our colleagues. In theory, this is nothing revolutionary, I admit. It's just, again, just to show what's possible using GraphQL. And if I just switch to the code itself, you'll see that it's pretty straightforward. I believe it's under here. Cool. So we have this, as I said, this is an example I took from Microsoft website, and all the logic is handled in this one JS file, and particularly this one function. So you'll see that I'm passing to this function, I'm passing the query. So this is what we type in the search bar. And then with that query parameter, I am calling the GraphQL endpoint. So you'll see that I'm calling the preview endpoint. So when it comes to Experience Edge, so let's say you have a Content Hub instance and you enable Experience Edge, it automatically comes out of the box with two endpoints. So you get a preview endpoint and a delivery endpoint, and that comes useful when you want to test stuff. So let's say you want to get a content piece that it's not ready approved, but you still want to see how it looks on the let's say QAT website or development website. So for that, you can use the preview endpoint, and then for your production site, you can use the delivery one, which is more well, basically it's the same, but in terms of CDNs, I think it allows more. Well, it's much faster when you use that one. Now, as I said, I'm calling the GraphQL endpoint the preview one, and I'm passing a query. And then in this query, I'm passing this query parameter. So this will be marked as term. So if you look in here in variables, I'm passing exactly this one. And then I'm requesting results, file name ID. And then this is the relationship that I was telling you about. So typically, if you'd use the REST API, you'd have to make another call here to call this relationship asset to public link, and then from that you'd get the relative URL. Whereas with GraphQL, you can put it all in one query. And regarding queries, a better way to test and look at queries is to use the IDE. So if I just switch back to, I believe it's the next one. Oh, it decided to disappear. Oh, it's right here. So every instance of Content Hub that has Experience Edge comes with this ID as well, which is really useful for testing and just running your queries. It also has a documentation, so you can see exactly all of the entities that are available through this endpoint. So if you want to get more details, for example, if I want to see project categories, I can look in here and see exactly what comes back and what items I have in there. It's also useful because it has some auto completion. So for example, if I just delete file name in here, and let's say I want to get it again, I would just type F, and then you can see all of the options that you have to query. So it really allows you to kind of know what's inside, even without having to study the schema too hard. So now, if I just add this and hit play, this will basically run this query against the GraphQL endpoint. Again, the reason I wanted to show you this is just for you to know that it's something that's out there. So if you ever have a Content Hub instance and you want to test stuff quickly, I'd highly suggest using this. As you saw in my code as well, you can also pass query variables in here. So this is where I'm passing the orange term, but you can make it more dynamic as well. And then in terms of the actual endpoint itself, it's also important to mention that it's not only assets that are available through this. So if we go to my Manage tab, this is my Content Hub instance, and then go to the delivery platform, you'll see that basically we can make anything in Content Hub available through this. So we have pretty much all the entities that you can think of. And if I click on one of these, you can see exactly all of the fields. If you want to restrict certain fields to be published, you can do so. You can also automate in terms of, okay, what's published to the preview endpoint and what's published to the delivery endpoint. And the way I've done that in the past is to do it with triggers. So let's say you have a content piece like I gave you, like I told you in the example previously. So you have a content piece that you just want to publish to your dev website. But then as soon as it goes through the approval process, you want to make sure that it's on the delivery endpoint, which will go to the production website. So you can set up a trigger saying, okay, I'm waiting for this asset to, well, this content piece to be approved. And then as soon as it's approved, I'm going to make it available on the delivery endpoint as well. Cool. So if we just go back to the code, as I said, we're just passing this query. And then as soon as we get our results, all I'm doing is creating a card. In this case, I'm actually creating two cards. So I have one card that it's created when the asset has no public link. So this is where I'm passing, for the title, I'm passing the file name that I'm receiving from the response, GraphQL response, as well as a path to get into that entity. So in case you want to create the public link, this is how I'm passing that path. Important thing here to kind of remember as well is this resolve editor. So typically, you may know that to access entities in Content Hub, you'd have entity ID. And most of the times you wouldn't know whether that entity, it's a product or it's an asset detail page. So that's why we have this resolve editor. Basically what this does, it's you just give it an ID and then it would figure out which details page it needs to show you. So it's a really nice way to kind of make sure you always get the correct editing page rather than checking for the asset entity to see whether or not it's a product page or a asset page. And then, as I said, in case the asset has a public link, then all I'm doing is creating another card. And then in that card, I'm passing it the file name and then the image itself. And then the image itself is composed of the relative URL path. And then I'm just passing this entity URL, which is typically the same for all of the Content Hub instances. The only difference would be the URL, the initial URL in here. But then all you have to do is say API, public, content. And then if you just give it that relative URL, that's your public link. And then again, I'm making that button available through the resolve editor. And that is pretty much it in terms of the code. I realized I'm going super fast. Is there any questions so far?
I have one on so the authentication, I saw you have a API key, is it? It's sent in the headers?
Yeah, that's correct. So the authentication is done through this HTTP headers. So we call it a GraphQL token, and then you can very easily generate one of those keys. So if I just go back to my manage platform, there is a new tab now in Content Hub where you can create your API keys. So this is different from the typical one. So in the REST API, you'd have to create one of those tokens, you'd have to send username and password. But then with this one, you can do it right inside the platform. So you don't need to make any extra calls. So if you go to API keys, and then you hit add, you press on add. This is where you can specify, okay, I want a key for the delivery endpoint, or I want a key for the preview endpoint, and then you give it a name, and that creates that key. And then just by passing it in the headers, that's your authentication, basically, yeah.
Okay. Can you do like OAuth ones as well? Or?
No. So that I believe the way you would use OAuth in this case is to initially get access to the REST API and then generate one of these keys. But the authentication mechanism for GraphQL, it's just that token.
Cool. Any other questions?
If there's no direct questions, I would also want to point out the documentation website. You probably are aware of it, but yeah, if you just go to this blogstylelabs.com and then Content Hub 4.0, this is where you can find the Experience Edge documentation. It also has some query examples, which would be useful if you're trying to create something using GraphQL. Yeah, I didn't realize that when I was practicing this, it took me a bit longer, but I guess because of the nerves, I went much faster.
Do you have to use a hook in Teams to actually integrate?
I'm sorry, I can't hear that very well.
Do you have to use a hook in Teams to be able to integrate with the endpoint?
No, so this is running locally. So as I said, probably if you do it in a production environment, you would create this app and then you deploy this app to your organization team. And to do so, I believe there's some deployment processes in there. I've been reading about it. I didn't try it myself because I don't have I don't have administrator rights to Teams. So that's why I had to do it locally. But I believe if you just create this app, so this is basically, as I showed you, it's just an app that can be then deployed to the marketplace. So you would probably create your app with your preview key or delivery key, and then once that app is created and deployed, then anybody in the organization can use it. They would obviously use the same key, so that's why it becomes useful to kind of distribute it between preview and delivery, or perhaps you'd want to create another one that's just used for this specific app.
Okay. So was this a bit of a proof of concept just to do an integration, or was this a bit of a sales tool or something that you're doing for a customer?
Yeah, so it was for a customer. So initially they wanted to, it was just an exploratory question. They were wondering if we can integrate with Teams and to share messages and share assets. And yeah, that's why I've decided to create it. Obviously, there's more ways you could do this in, as you may know, with the .NET SDK that allows you to create a similar integration as well, and the REST API, as I said. But I chose this because this is kind of the simplest and fastest way you can do something like this without having to do any heavy coding. One advantage that I could think of why you would want to use the .NET SDK is that it will allow you to actually use assets that don't have a public link. So with the .NET SDK, you could actually download that asset locally and upload it straight away rather than creating a public link for it. But apart from that, I can't see any reason I would use that over this.
Okay. And obviously this is Experience Edge for Content Hub, and this Experience Edge for XP or XM as well.
Yes. So
how is that as a product? How is that? Can you buy that separately, or?
I'm not sure if it's available yet to be purchased, but in terms of technicalities, again, you would make you'd make item data in Sitecore XM available through this GraphQL endpoint. And for those of you that are familiar with JSS, the content would look exactly the same. So you'd use GraphQL to get those item data, which looks exactly like the same item data that you get with JSS or headless services.
How does the license experience stage price? Is it just part of the story?
I'm sorry, I heard there's a question, but I can't tell exactly.
So, I'll try and repeat it. How does the licensing for Experience Edge for Content Hub work? Is it part of the license cost for Content Hub, or is there an additional cost?
It's available as an add-on for any Content Hub instance, and I believe, you can basically add it as an add-on. Yeah. In terms of cost, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to to say the exact price, but it's, in my opinion, it's not that expensive compared to other add-ons that you can have.
Okay. Yeah. So is the cost fixed, or does it change depending on how much data you've got, or what kind of license you've got, or the client, etc.?
No, the cost for Experience Edge is fixed, so it doesn't really rely on usage metrics and so on.
Okay. And is Experience Edge something that can be deployed on? Does it have to be Azure, or can it be Netlify, or?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Basically, the way you wouldn't deploy Experience Edge, you would come with the product, and then all you would get is the endpoint. And then, yes, if you create an app that uses Experience Edge or the graphical endpoint, then yeah, you can deliver it through Netlify. But yeah, I'm not sure I understand it correctly.
Okay, so you purchase it and then it's enabled on the platform.
Yeah.
And then you can then deploy that.
Yeah, so we would take care of all the CDNs and all the delivery endpoints and so on. So once you purchased it, you'll get only the graphical endpoint, but that's all you need basically.
Right. Okay. So there isn't an option because it's SaaS, I guess. So there's not like an option for
exactly
self-hosted Experience Edge.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's where my question was coming from, I guess.
In terms of XM, I believe, I don't have all the details right now, but I believe that might be available, like you say, to be able to deploy it yourself. But yeah, I don't have all the details on the XM side of Experience Edge. It's mainly Content Hub that I've been focusing lately on.
Cool. Okay. Any other questions from Bruce? No? Okay. Yeah, I think that was all of our questions. Daniel, thank you very much for your time, for staying on late for us and presenting for us today. Much appreciated. Thank you very much.
If there's any other questions, feel free to email me. If you need the code, if you want to get access to the code, I'm happy to share it as well through GitHub or any code repository.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I might follow up on that and try and share that with everyone just in case they want to take a look at it.
Cool.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, guys.
Cheers,
have a good rest of your evening.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Thank you.